Why are INFJs reluctant to ask for help, even though they would seem, prima facie, to be willing to help? So there is this idea that INFJs willingly help other people, but are in fact not so forthcoming when it comes to asking for help. This was asked by a viewer, CL Strife, and I thought that it was interesting to return to this question because following the same theme that I've been kind of exploring in recent videos, given that I have developed a new framework through my latest book, The Infinite Soul, that casts light on old questions in new ways. At least I hope it does, and I hope that I can illustrate that in this video. So first of all, we need to ask the question, is this, let's call it a preconceived idea or a cliche about INFJs, or at least a widely circulated notion about INFJs being altruistic and yet not wanting to, or not being forthcoming with asking for help? Is it something that's, holds? Is it something that sticks the landing when we look at the evidence? Okay. So I've interacted with a lot of INFJs, I've observed a lot of INFJs, I've observed myself, of course, and I've talked, over the years to lots and lots of INFJs in real life and online, because it's important to be able to be in touch with both worlds. You don't necessarily come across the same kinds of INFJs depending on whether you are interacting with online INFJs or INFJs offline, including INFJs that don't know they're INFJs, sometimes INFJs that don't care about knowing that they are in fact INFJs according to the Jungian system. So my take is that there is a degree of truth to this. It seems to be something that belongs to the essence of INFJness, if that really exists. Even though it's a little bit exaggerated, okay? It's exaggerated at least a little bit on both sides, in the sense that not all INFJs are altruistic. Consider solipsistic INFJs, not altruistic. And the ways in which non-solipsistic INFJs, and there are three kinds of those, the compliant / adaptive submissive, the spiritual / secure, and the spiritualized subtypes of INFJs, they don't manifest altruism in the same way either. And they don't have the same relationship to asking for support. So we need to navigate those waters in a way that's more nuanced and does more justice to the fact of INFJ life than is typically the case when people kind of take a shortcut and make blanket kind of statements about INFJs. All INFJs are like that. It's not true, but there are definitely similarities that are then generated through prisms of difference, okay? So, first of all, we need to distinguish a genuine sort of proactive altruism from slightly less genuine defensive altruism. So you can be in a situation where you're spontaneously just altruistic and helpful because you're happy to do that for others, and this is your way of expressing your care for people and the health of your interpersonal relationships. You'll see that in secure INFJs and in spiritualized INFJs. Now, one condition is, of course, that the environment for these particular kinds of INFJs, the environment being like what's not their NI world, what's outside, what's the external reality, right? Social reality, physical reality, and so forth, is no longer seen as an object of fear. It's no longer seen as something to be protected from, to be secure from. So the possible for spontaneous altruism there, the conditions for that anyway are met, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that a secure INFJ is necessarily going to be very altruistic. It will depend on the temperament of different kinds of INFJs, but usually a secure user of FE auxiliary is going to have a tendency toward projecting certain forms of support toward others. It's not necessarily going to come in the form of material help. It certainly will often come in the form of sort of help through conversation, through some kind of providing advice or informal therapy, in keeping with some of the natural talents of INFJs. And that makes sense, right? The less spontaneous and less proactive kinds of altruism are displayed by those of the compliant INFJ, because the compliant INFJ is really defending himself or herself by taking up this posture of being altruistic. They're doing this essentially to protect themselves from others. Like, the idea here is others won't hurt me, others won't impinge on my little universe that I have for myself if I show myself to be of use to them. So you see that there is a slightly more sort of self-directed kind of defensive posturing then happening in the case of that form of altruism. Now, in the case of being reluctant to ask people for help, well, again, here we have a difference, because the one who spontaneously helps people is going to be much more comfortable with the idea of spontaneously asking people for help. The secure INFJ or the spiritualized INFJ, having overcome this kind of fear, this kind of feeling that external reality, including social reality, is threatening, will tend to have more trust, essentially, in external reality, including in the representatives of that reality, that is, other people. So the idea of because once you expect people, once you ask people to help you, in a sense, you create a bond, you create a debt, not in a negative sense, but in the sense of, if this person helps you, then this person will implicitly be legitimate if they come to you asking for support later in life, or later in the week or the month of the year, or whatever. That's okay for the secure INFJ or the spiritualized INFJ, because it's in the nature of things. The interpersonal relationship is not threatening. So yes, why not be of support to each other and commit to future support through bonding? The thing about the compliant INFJ or the adaptive submissive, against synonym terms here, is that just like the solipsists, they have in common that they have an incomplete sense of self and incomplete ego, meaning that this ego feels easily attacked by the outside. It feels easily invaded, and it's sometimes, particularly in the case of the solipsist, but it can happen at smaller doses in the case of the adaptive submissive, there can be a fear of the annihilation of that ego by the outside, contamination or annihilation. So you don't really want to create too many commitments, because if you create a commitment, it's a way in the minds of these INFJs to give the recipe for them to remain exposed to the risk of this impingement and this infringement. So they don't want to create those bonds, and so they will tend to refrain from asking for help when they might in fact need help. In the case of the secure INFJ or the spiritualized INFJs, again, temperament will play a role. Some will be more spontaneous asking for support, others won't. It depends also on the way that they relate to NI and things like that. It would take a while to get into. But essentially, so there's a lot of nuances in this relationship that INFJs have with, on the one hand, helping and asking for support. And you won't really understand what it means for INFJs if you haven't understood that there are different subtypes of INFJs, each with their life histories, with the wounds, their traumas, their defense mechanisms, and how they use those defense mechanisms to deal with the fact of living. If you'd like to know more about INFJs in general, don't forget I've written 2 books on the INFJ type. Latest one being The Infinite Soul, INFJ Life in the Modern World, which is all about how INFJs can lead productive, fulfilling lives in a way that is authentic to them in a world that is often seen as hostile. Link is right below, guys. And don't forget, there's also the prequel, The Ecstatic Soul, which is all about the INFJ mind. You want to understand the INFJ mind more? INFJ consciousness, what it's like to be an INFJ, to feel like an INFJ. This is the deepest investigation, a new look at the INFJ personality. The link is also below. The 2 books, of course, go very well together. And Don't forget that my Patreon page is the lifeblood of my channel. It helps the channel running, so I'd be immensely grateful if you consider providing support. The link is below, anywhere from $3.50 a month. You can interact with me there, interact with the community. You can suggest, topics for me to cover. You get priority for that, and most interestingly, perhaps, you get access to bonus content. Every 2 weeks, I release Patreon exclusive videos going more in depth on topics that I explore on the mainstream YouTube and in my books. And of course, most of all, you help me. Thank you very much, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.